Originally released in Japan on November 25th, 2017, and slowly imported into the TCG card by Painstaking Card, except you needle fiber. Link Vrains and Link Vrains Pack 2 have done something that responds perfectly to a major criticism that came with the advent of the Link mechanic back in 2017. As some decks would naturally get left behind, and in extreme cases even become completely unplayable, the Link Vrains pack was a way to try to aid those decks by releasing a one-off support Link monster to at least bring them to Master Rule 4. I would categorize these Link Vrains monsters into two types: the direct and indirect supporters. The direct supporters are just that. They are Link monsters who are part of the archetype, usually require in-archetype materials, and have effects extremely specific to what the archetype wants or needs to do. The second type is the indirect supporter. Now, though these monsters still share the archetypal name with the archetype they're trying to support, usually these links have materials slightly more generic. On top of that, their effects are either generically good, such as a card draw or a pop. Other times they have an effect that works the best in their own archetype, but can also indirectly boost the strategies of other archetypes that share similar characteristics with its own. For this video, I want to list my top 6 most desired cards I would like to see in Link Vrains Pack 3 by theorizing 3 of these direct and 3 indirect Link support monsters. Some self-imposed rules in this list are that they have to be in an archetype that doesn't already have a Link monster, and they must not fundamentally change the way the deck plays, only complements the already established strategy. As much as it pains me, there will also be no joke cards. I will try to make them as realistic and not completely game-shaking as possible. Though Predaplants are very much their own full archetype with strategies revolving around predator counters and fusion summoning, they are just generic enough to have permeated many strategies on more than one occasion. Not only was the Predaplant engine used to grab either brilliant or instant fusion in a variety of combo decks, but even now, there is experimentation with their newest release fusion monster at the time of this video as a tech choice for a super poly target to go up against matches such as Thunder Dragons. I look to another Vrains Pack link that tries to implement counters by the name of Alien Shock Trooper Frame for inspiration for this link. It will need 2 plant types as its materials with the basic bottom left right configuration. This card would get to add predator counters onto all monsters your opponent controls by tributing 1 monster it points to. You can remove 2 predator counters from the field in order to add 1 fusion, except the fusion wave motion, card from your deck to your hand. This would reward players for using predator counters and be generic enough to basically allow any deck with a decent amount of plants to search a fusion card at the cost of a tribute and your opponent having 2 monsters on the field. I believe this is a pretty fair trade-off of being good enough to be a tech option, but being even better in the deck it's meant for. In a vacuum, Morphtronics performs surprisingly well if Selfon and Smartphon get decent numbers on their die rolls. Though the original intention of Morphtronics was the battle position gimmick and being the minions of Power Tool Dragon, I've noticed modern day Morphtronics focus more on a synchro strategy through swarming aided by multiple ways to special summon from the graveyard. This card would be a link 2 of 2 Morphtronic monsters. Anytime a Morphtronic monster would activate its effect involving a die roll, you can instead automatically treat the roll before you roll as a 3. This guarantees that the effect of Selfon and Smartphon aren't absolutely terrible, but if you're feeling lucky, you can still try to get higher. Whenever a Morphtronic monster this card points to changes its battle position, add 1 Morphtronic card from your deck to your hand. This second effect is hardly ever going to be executed, but if you truly play Morphtronics as they should be played, you'll get a nice little reward of searchability. Metaphys. I personally think they're a very interesting banish-oriented archetype. Though it isn't a super popular theme, I feel that banishing cards is beneficial in a variety of decks. This Metaphys link could be a way to introduce a link monster version of Curious. It could be somewhat generic, requiring 2 monsters of the same type and attribute to summon, and we can give it like an up and down arrow, since Metaphys and other banish-focused decks often don't rely on extra deck summoning too much. This monster's effect would be, once per turn, during either player's turn, you can banish all monsters this card points to, if there is at least one in either of the zones, in order to banish one non-dark monster from your deck. This card cannot be used as a link material. I added that last part because if it could be used, this would be too generic and would result in a free banish of an opponent's monster and then a link up by banishing Giant Rex into a free link 3. Maybe this wouldn't be too crazy of an interaction though. I mean, we have to sell Vrains Pack 3 somehow. Amorphage were royally screwed 2 ways to Sunday by Master Rule 4. Being a control-style pendulum deck, the change of having the pendulum scales become 2 of the 5 slots available to a player for spell and trap cards makes the back row too tight for comfort. Amorphage players, all 2 of them, basically always face the real challenge of running out of space to play both Floodgates and their necessary in-archetype continuous spell and trap cards in addition to their 2 pendulum scales. By no longer allowing an easy swarming from the extra deck, the tributing of their monsters as a cost once per turn is now even more of a downfall than it was before, for now it's much harder to pendulum the tributed monsters back out. Amorphage are a very unique deck, and because of this, they're going to have to use a unique form of link summon. This bad boy, Amorphage Commandment, will require 3 dragon-type monsters, and its effect will be, you can also link summon this card by banishing up to 2 Amorphage monsters from face-up in your extra deck face-down, as well as tributing dragon-type monsters on your side of the field, equaling a total of 3 between the extra deck and the monsters on your field. With its 3 downward arrows, this will hopefully be a blessing for these sins and open up some space to pendulum summon some tributes once again. Once per turn, you can send 1 face-up Amorphage card from your side of the field back to the hand in order to add 1 Amorphage card from your deck to your hand. I know, advantageous is an understatement, but I feel like with as slow and, quite frankly, bad this deck is, it wouldn't break it. This would be able to free up a small bit of space on the field, as well as enable you to switch between Floodgates, Scales, and search even more Scales, so you always have the right Amorphage for the right situation. As we have seen with Magical Muskets and Magical Musketeer Max, not all decks need a link monster to gain access to more than 1 extra deck monster, but rather, links can be used to help boost a deck's consistency and speed through generic effects that can be easily accessed through the extra deck. As overhyped as they were, once they came out, Element Sabers flopped. Hard. And this was because of their reliance to one very specific card, their field spell. Instead, this Link 1 monster requiring 1 level 4 or lower Element Saber monster as a material would simply be a searcher, in the same way that Alistair the Invoker of Madness became a searcher for invocation. The effect I would give this monster is, you can send 1 Element Saber monster from your hand to the graveyard, a staple in Element Saber effects, in order to add one Temple of the Elemental Lords from your deck to your hand. You can only use the effect of this card's name once per turn. If this card leaves the field, skip your next battle phase. The restrictions on this card fall in line with what Element Sabers are already restricted in doing, so I think this is a fair enough effect to give this already tier 3, 2.5 at best deck some hope for playability. Chemicritters have always been such an interesting archetype to me, and their effects, once they managed to get them, weren't bad. They were just kind of slow and needed not only graveyard setup, but extra cards in order to have them become their effect monster forms in the first place. So, let's take my boy Raptinus, smack some link arrows on this guy, and have any Gemini monster it points to become an effect monster and gain their effects. And once per turn, you can send one Gemini monster from your deck to the graveyard in order to gain an additional normal summon. As we saw with the Brilliant Engine and Nightmare Goblin, RIP, this would probably be abused, but if it takes 2 Gemini to make and only lets you normal summon additionally by sending a Gemini to grave from deck, you would have to run a minimum of 3 bricks, in addition to trying to get basically 2 normal monsters onto the field in the first place. Something like this I feel would be what Electromite should have been for Pendulums. A slight boost of a game mechanic's speed and consistency, and it would potentially lead to cool and inventive interactions. Hey guys, so this is my first ever YouTube video, more specifically, YugiTube video. I don't know what the direction of this channel is really going to be yet. I really enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! And YugiTube, and I figured since I have thoughts and ideas that go along with the community, I might as well post and share them and see what people think. I'm planning on posting at least once every 2 weeks because school's kicking my butt and all, but I want to try to make this thing work. So thanks a lot, and if you're in it for the long haul and want to support me early on, click subscribe. Thank you.